they could not match it with Sirhan's gun because the gun had just been ravaged by these souvenir hunters in the LAPD crime lab. I had interviewed 114 cops who were part of the crime scene investigation, and so I said to these guys, I said, what'd you see that night? What'd you do? And when when the three slugs who match each other but don't match Sirhan's gun came up, I went to the crime lab guys and I said, okay, what happened here? How come you couldn't make a match? And one of them pulled me off the side and says, well, listen, this is what happened. After Sirhan was convicted in 1969, we're professionals here. We're specialists. We take great pride in our work as firearms identification experts, as ballistic experts. And we like to keep souvenirs. And so they took Sirhan's gun and they put it into a water and fired it into a water tank, probably hundreds of times, collected the slugs, and then they put them in these plastic display cases where all the guys in the firearms identification got these souvenirs that they could take home and add to their collection of slugs from famous murders, the guns from committing famous murders. But when you shoot the hell out of a gun like that, it's going to change the lands and the grooves and the cannelures and everything else inside the muzzle of the gun. And thus, 6 years later, in 1975, when the court appointed this firearms a panel, they could match the three slugs with each other, but they could not match it with Sirhan's gun because the gun had just been ravaged by these souvenir hunters in the LAPD crime lab. So that was an explanation that I came up with that. On the matter of the extra bullets, the circled holes, what had happened was Kennedy didn't want a police presence there because the Watts riots had just occurred, and he had no bodyguard there except for this one FBI agent named Bill Berry who was unarmed. There were hotel security guys there, like Caesar. There were I think a half a dozen guys, security guys, and they were basically there for crowd control. They worked for the hotel, and so because there was no police presence when the shooting occurred, no law enforcement agency was at the scene. But there was a contingent of sheriff's deputies who were at the IBM building close to the Ambassador Hotel guarding the ballots from the county election that night. And they ran over and they formed a wedge and they cleared out the crime scene, got everybody out of there because it was just, the people were just tearing it apart. They were screaming and grieving, and it was horrible in there. Again, 77 people in this very, very crowded pantry. And so no one had ever tried to figure out who had made these holes. I mean, who had circled the holes. So I got a magnifying glass, and I could see this scribbling. It was like up and down, up and down, up and down. It was like a bunch of W's, up and down, up and all joined together. And then there was LASO, and then there was 723, the number 723. Now, at that time, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department was known as the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office, so it was LASO. So I called a friend of mine who was a source at the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, and I said, listen, you guys were known as Los Angeles Sheriff's Office in 1968. And he said, yeah. And I said, do me a favor. Could you check to see who had badge 723 on June 4th, 1968? So the primary election was on June 4th, 1968. Senator Kennedy was shot at 12:15 a.m. on June 5th, 1968, and he had died at 1:44 a.m. on June 6th. This is all Pacific time. Anyway, my source came back and he said badge 723 at that time was a gentleman by the name of Walter II. I spell it. He says Walter T-E-W. And then you could picture him writing W-T-E-W, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, W-T-E-W. And so I said, "Where is he? I'd like to interview him." And he said, he's dead. He had died about 18 months earlier. And I said, "Does he have a number for his family, for a widow or something? I'd like to talk to her." And so he gave me the home number. So I called up the widow, and I said, "Ma'am, my name's Dan Mulday. I'm a journalist, and I'd like to talk to you about your husband. At the Robert Kennedy murder scene, there's only one person who really marked something there, left his mark, literally, at the crime scene, and that was your husband. So let me ask you, how long was he in the firearms identification department? How long was he a ballistics guy with the sheriff's department?" And he said, "Oh my goodness." She said, he wasn't a firearms identification, he was a motorcycle cop." I said, "Excuse me?" She goes, "Yeah, he was a motorcycle cop." So what apparently had happened was when who was at the IBM building that night, and he was part of the contingent of sheriff's deputies who ran over to the crime scene at the Ambassador, formed a wedge and dragged and got everybody out of there. Apparently he had seen some holes, these 4 holes, and he apparently just decided, somebody either told him or something, but he decided to circle and identify these holes. And I talked to his commander, and he said, yes, that's the way he would mark his evidence back at that time. So, okay, that explained that everybody walking by there, all these dozens of cops walking by there who'd said that they'd seen extra bullets, and explained that. But what about the FBI? What's this with the FBI report where they're identifying bullets, not alleged bullet holes or reported bullet holes, but bullet holes? So I found the guy who had done the report, or at least that part of the report, and he was not an FBI special agent per se. He was not like a field agent. He was in the photo lab. And so I tracked him down to West Covina, California, which was a little east of Los Angeles. And and this guy was really upset when I showed up he wouldn't talk to me on the phone. He kept hanging up on me. So I ambushed him at his house, and he really was upset. He was very upset with me. And then I came back a second time, like a week later, and I think he was ready to shoot me. He was so agitated. I said, "Sir, all I want to know, just why did you identify these holes as bullet holes in your report?" And he said, "Get out of here. I don't want to have anything to do with you." Wow. So I had to go back into the state archives, and the files that I helped get released, and I went to the state archives, started going through reports, and I found a report from Greiner about his walkthrough at the crime scene when he had put this evidence together on behalf of the photo lab. And I was wondering which criminalist or firearms identification expert from the LAPD had identified these as bullet holes, which made him comfortable to say these are, in fact, bullet holes. According to his report, there was no LAPD person even there at the scene. It was a hotel clerk, an assistant hotel clerk at that, who gave him the tour of the crime scene. And when he saw these circled holes, which had been circled by Walt II during the minutes after the shooting when the LASO came in there to clean out the crime scene, it was because the assistant hotel clerk had identified these holes as bullet holes that the FBI took this as gospel